Hello, everyone. Welcome to join us in making 6 realistic dogs. Considering the difficulty level of production, we suggest that everyone start learning with Dog 1 and Dog 2. These 2 videos will focus on explaining the production process for beginners. Before we start, let's take out our handle. 1 medium needle. 1 fine needle. What we are teaching everyone to make our small dolls. So we are providing these 2 types of needles. The medium needle is slightly longer than the fine needle. The tip of the medium needle is also slightly thicker than the fine needle. Both types of needle tips will have many small barbs. During the felting process, the barbs move the wool, causing the wool to interlock. To achieve the felting effect, the medium needle felts faster and is used for shaping in the early and mid stages. The felting speed with fine needles is relatively slow, used for later light felting, to make the surface of the doll smooth and even. When making larger or even larger works, the following will be used: purse needle, 3-pronged needle, 7-pronged needle. These types of needles have a particularly fast felting speed, so they are used for making large works. The medium and fine needles provided for everyone make it easier to create small dolls. First time using a felting needle, we need to take a needle out of the needle holder. New needles are coated with anti-rust oil to prevent the felting needle from rusting. Before we use it, you can wipe off the rust-proof oil on the surface with a paper towel. The correct way to clean the needle is to gently wipe along the direction of the needle. After cleaning, it can be used together with the handle. When cleaning the needle, remember not to wipe back and forth. This can easily lead to the needle accidentally piercing your finger, causing injury. If the needle is not used for a long time, to avoid rusting, you can apply rust-proof oil or cooking oil to the surface. After oiling, store it in a needle case. Using the needle. When felting wool, the needle needs to be kept vertical to the wool being felted. Insert the wool in the direction of the needle tip. When pulling the needle out, it needs to be pulled out in the opposite direction of where it was inserted. Then repeat. Continuously repeat. This will allow the wool to felt. When felting wool, make sure to apply force in the direction of the needle. Do not press the needle. Pressing the needle can easily lead to breakage. Also, do not lift the needle upwards after inserting it into the wool. This can also cause the needle to break. Then take out our handle. Pull out the wooden plug inside the handle. You can see one end is relatively large. One end is relatively small. Take the end of the needle with the hook and fit it into the groove of the smaller end. Then put our needle back into the handle. It can't be loose like this. Push it in tightly with some force. This way it won't loosen up. Next, we need to prepare the workbench. To better demonstrate for everyone, the video uses a white foam pad. Before starting, you can put on finger cots. The shorter one is worn on our thumb. The longer one is worn on our index finger. Like this. For beginners, it is very necessary to wear finger cots to prevent our needle from injuring our hands while felting. Once you become skilled, you can take off the finger cots to operate. In the instructional video to help everyone see better, the demonstrator did not wear finger cots. For better distinction in the instructional video, We use a wooden handle to represent the fine needle, and a blue handle to represent the medium needle. In reality, you may receive two wooden handles. You can use one wooden handle to install the fine needle and one wooden handle to install the medium needle. For convenience of distinction, you can make marks on the wooden handle. There are two types of handles, wooden and plastic. The functions of both types are the same, it's just the material that is different. Today we are going to learn how to make a cute corgi dog. The instruction manual has a one-to-one image of the corgi, and during the making process, we can repeatedly refer to the one-to-one blueprint to check if the size of our work is appropriate. The head and body of the corgi need to be completed into separate parts. The muzzle, butt and limbs are added later on. The first thing we need to make is the corgi's head. From this blueprint we can see that it is close to a spherical shape. We take out the wool and roll it to the size of the head. Pinch the wool with one hand and roll it tightly inward, while using the other hand to firmly hold the wool to prevent it from loosening. After rolling to a certain size, compare it with the blueprint. The rolled wool needs to be slightly larger than the head in the blueprint. The wool ball now is still a bit small, so let's roll a little more wool. Now the wool is slightly larger than the head in the blueprint. Mark it with your hand. The wool should be taken about here. Place your hands on both sides of the mark and pull the wool apart with force. This way, we can take off a section of wool. You can roll the wool up for comparison and confirm again whether the amount of wool taken is appropriate. Now the rolled wool ball is quite a bit larger than the head on the blueprint, which means too much wool was taken. The excess part needs to be removed. Open the wool, and we can take off some excess wool from its tail. We can also take off some excess wool from the side until the size we roll up is just slightly larger than what is shown on the blueprint. When taking wool, be sure to take it in small amounts multiple times to avoid running out later. Once the wool ball is slightly larger than what is shown in the picture, we can proceed to the next step. Let's set the blueprint aside. Before moving on to the next step, we can place the gray felting mat underneath the wool for easier crafting later. To make it easier for everyone to see, I will use this large foam mat for the crafting process. Before wrapping the wool, let's check if there are any stray fibers and remove them if necessary. Once all the impurities are removed, we can start wrapping the wool. The wool we have taken is flat on one end and fluffy on the other end. We need to start wrapping from the flat end. When wrapping the wool, be careful not to wrap it too loosely, as loose wool won't be felted properly. The correct method is to pinch the wool with one hand and roll it inward. Use the other hand to firmly hold the wool to prevent it from loosening. Repeat this action until the wool ball gets bigger. Roll the wool into a ball shape until a small tail left at the end. Then place the wool on the felting mat. Wrap the tail end of the wool upwards and pinch it tightly to secure it. Take out the medium needle and felt the tail part to secure it. When felting, watch the position of the needle and slow down to avoid poking your fingers. Adjust the direction of your hand and felt the lower end of the wool ball to secure it. Make sure to use the medium needle during the initial shaping of the wool. Continue to hold the wool and felt the top part to secure it. After securing the 3 places, felt a few stitches on the front side as well. After securing it like this, we can take a look at the wool. We need to felt it into a ball shape. Now the areas where the wool is sticking out need to be felted in to create a smooth curve. The bottom part is roughly in a curved shape, but the top here is still a bit protruding, so let's felt this part in as well. Now the wool ball is roughly spherical. We can keep rotating the wool and felt the ball evenly to make it firm.
During the felting process, you can occasionally squeeze the wool ball to check its softness. Right now, the wool ball feels very soft and needs to be felted tighter. Be careful not to felt it too hard, as a ball that is too hard is difficult to modify.
Keep poking the wool. The wool ball will gradually become denser. Every little while, you can pinch the wool ball to check its softness. Right now, it still feels a bit soft, so we need to keep felting. The video is edited and the actual production time is longer, so everyone needs to be patient. Now it's relatively denser. Let's pinch the wool ball. It has some elasticity now, and this softness is quite suitable. Let's take out the blueprint and compare it to the size of the head on the blueprint. Now the size is about right, so we can proceed to the next step. If the wool ball is a bit larger than the size on the blueprint, we can use the needle to continue felting the wool ball until it is about the same size as the head in the picture. If the wool ball is smaller than the head in the picture, we can add a small amount of wool to the wool ball and felt it until it reaches the appropriate size. Now the size is about the same as the head in the blueprint. Let's move on to the next step. Take out our fine needle. Use the fine needle to poke lightly. It should be a gentle poke, which will further compact the surface of the wool ball. During the felting process, you also need to occasionally squeeze the wool ball to avoid it becoming too hard. Continuously rotate the wool to ensure the wool ball being felted evenly. After poking tightly for a while, the wool ball should feel more elastic than before. At this point, we take out the blueprint and compare the size. At this time, the size can be slightly smaller than what is shown on the blueprint, because we will still add a layer of wool to the surface of the head later. If you find that the wool ball is significantly smaller than the blueprint after comparison, we can add a little wool to the surface of the wool ball and felt it tightly until it reaches the appropriate size. Once the head size is adjusted, we can move on to the next step. Now we need to lay a layer of torn wool over the ball. Let's take out some wool. Now we need to tear the wool apart. When tearing the wool, do not tear it horizontally. This makes it difficult for the fibers to be torn apart. Also, do not bring your hands too close together when tearing, as this will also make it hard to tear the wool apart. A correct method is to tear the wool vertically and pull it apart to the sides. Then rotate the wool and stack it together. Continue to separate your hands a little and pinch the wool, pulling it forcefully apart. Rotate and overlap it together. Repeat the action until the wool fibers are torn short. This is what the torn wool looks like. We take a portion from the torn white wool. Gently spread the white wool into an even thin sheet. If there are areas that look whiter, it means they are thicker. Gently pull them apart with our hands to make it an even white thin sheet. From the side, it looks like a thin layer. Then we take out the finished head. Lay the thin wool sheet on the ball and use the fine needle to lightly poke it, allowing the wool sheet to be felted onto the surface of the ball. When laying the wool, be sure to add it in small amounts multiple times to avoid changing the shape by adding too much at once. When poking, be sure to poke lightly to avoid pushing the wool too deep into the ball. Laying this layer of thin wool can make our small ball a bit more delicate. The video is edited and the actual production time is longer, so everyone needs to be patient. This way, the surface will look more delicate after poking. Then we continue to add thin sheets of torn wool, covering all the areas that haven't been covered yet, until the entire ball is covered with a layer of thin wool. Continue adding thin sheets of torn wool to the uncovered areas for felting. We have already covered the entire ball with a layer of thin wool. This will make the surface of the ball tighter and more delicate. Once this part is done, we can move on to the next step. Next, we need to make the dog's muzzle.
From the blueprint, we can see that the dog's muzzle is protruding.
Let's take a look at the dog's face. Above its mouth, you can see that the nasal polyps are to round, bulging shapes which we will make using to balls. Then we move on to its chin. Let's start by making two small balls. We take out the wool. First, take a portion of the wool. Now we take out the wool, the size of the nasal polyp. We tightly wrap the wool. At this point, we can compare the size again. This size seems appropriate. We will open up the wool. Remove the excess from the marked area. Let's wrap it again. This size seems appropriate. Now let's open the wool. Set the blueprint aside. We fold the wool in half and wrap it tightly again. After folding, pinch the head and roll it inward.
When there's a little tail left, we place the wool ball on the felting mat.
Take out the medium needle and use it to felt and secure it. Since the wool ball is relatively small at this point, we can slow down the felting speed to avoid poking our fingers. Once secured, rotate the wool and felt the wool ball into a small spherical shape. After roughly shaping it into a soft ball, we can switch from the medium needle to the fine needle and continue to felt the ball tighter. During the felting process, remember to occasionally squeeze the wool ball to check its softness and hardness. Now the wool ball looks a bit firmer than before. Let's give it a squeeze. Like this, it has a certain elasticity, and this level is quite suitable. Let's take out the blueprint and check the size. This size is still quite appropriate. Now we have completed our first ball. If it's too small, we can add a little wool and felt it tighter until we adjust it to the right size. Next, we'll use the same method to complete the second ball. Now that the softness and hardness are quite suitable, let's compare it with the ball we made earlier. The ball we made later is a bit bigger. If the sizes are different, it will cause facial asymmetry.
So we need to adjust the larger ball we made later.
We use scissors to trim the ball down to the same size as the other one. During the cutting process, we can occasionally compare it with the other one to avoid cutting it too small. Once it is the same size as the other one, we take a little bit of wool. At this point, we only need to take out a very small amount of wool. Tear the wool fibers into short pieces. While tearing, you can rotate the wool and tear it from different angles, which makes it easier to shred the wool. After the wool is shredded, we gently pull it into a very thin layer of woolen, then wrap it around the wool ball. Remove the excess parts. Then use the fine needle to felt and secure the surface wool. When laying the wool here, be sure to add it in small amounts multiple times to avoid making the ball too large again. After securing the surface wool, let's take out another small ball to compare. Once adjusted, the two small balls are the same size, and next we can proceed with the assembly. We take out the large ball we previously felted, first placing one of the small balls on top of the large ball. Take out the fine needle and use it to connect the balls. To avoid damaging the shape of the small ball, we need to deeply felt around the bottom edge of the small ball to achieve the connection effect. We start by inserting the needle at the bottom of the small ball, poking deeply into the large ball, and then poking around the bottom of the small ball. After completing a round of poking, you can check if the connection is secure. If there is still some looseness, you can repeat the felting process until the connection is stable. Once the first small ball is assembled, continue assembling the second small ball using the same method, making sure to connect the two small balls together. Now that both small balls are assembled, let's take a look at the assembled result. In the blueprint, we can see that the top of the dog's muzzle is relatively narrow. The muzzle we assembled is a bit wide, so we need to use a fine needle to poke along the sides of the muzzle towards the cheeks to narrow the top. Insert the needle from one side of the muzzle and felt it into the cheek. bringing the wool downwards. Repeat the felting process until the top narrows. From the bottom, you can see that the felted side has a shape that is narrow at the top and wider at the bottom. Next, we will complete the felting on the other side as well. Similarly, insert the needle from the edge of the other side and felt it into the cheek. During the felting process, you can adjust both sides simultaneously to make them more symmetrical. Now, there is a large gap between the two small balls. So felt the two small balls together. Insert the needle from the edge of one small ball into the other small ball, and repeat the felting process until the two small balls are connected. Now that it's adjusted, let's take a look at the effect. This is the top view of the dog. This is the front view. This is the bottom view. Next, let's make the dog's chin. We can take a look at the dog's chin. From here, we can see that the dog's chin is roughly the widest part, extending from the sides of the muzzle down to the neck. We'll take some white wool and tear it apart. Take a portion from the torn wool. Now we need to fold the wool to the size of the chin. Before folding, let's take a look at the blueprint. The size of the chin is roughly the width to the corners of the mouth. First, we will fold the wool in half. Then, we will fold both sides inward. The folded shape looks like a tongue, narrower on top and slightly wider on the bottom. Take a look at its side, it has a certain thickness. Let's compare the sizes. Now the width is just right. If it's too wide, we can fold it in a bit more. If it's too narrow, we can add a bit more wool to the sides. Now we will place the folded wool on the felting mat. Take out our fine needle. First, we will felt it into shape. After securing it, let's take a look at the side. Now the side of the wool has some small fibers. These are the wool fibers that came through from the bottom during the felting process. We place the side with the wool fluff facing up and gently poke downwards with the fine needle. At this point, it's important to poke lightly. If you poke too deep, the wool will be poked out from the bottom. By gently poking, the wool fluff is reinserted into the thin sheet. And now you can see that the fluff has disappeared. Next, we flip the wool over and poke both sides at the same time to tighten the wool. Now let's poke the sides. This piece of wool is relatively thin, and when you hold it with both hands, they will be very close together. So we need to poke the sides slowly to avoid poking our fingers. Continue felting while rotating, so that the edges can be felted evenly, but be careful not to poke the wider bottom area, leaving some fluff for assembly later.
When poking the sides, you can adjust the shape. If the top needs to be narrower,
Poke it a bit more. For areas where the lines are not smooth, we poke in the protruding parts. Next, we continue to poke to tighten the chin. This is what the chin looks like after felting. Now we need to assemble the chin onto the head. Take out the dog's head. Place the felted chin below the two small balls. The position looks good from the front. Let's take a look at the chin position from the side. We can lower the chin a bit. If it's too high, it will look like an underbite, which isn't very attractive. Now we take the fine needle and secure the chin to the head by felting. After securing the bottom, we will felt the upper part along the edge to the nasal polyps. This is how it looks after being secured. This is the secured side view. Front view. Another side view. Bottom view. And now the top view. Take a bit of torn white wool. We gently spread the torn wool with our hands to form an even thin sheet. From the side, it looks like a thin layer. If some areas are thicker, they will appear whiter, so we gently pull it apart with our hands to make it thinner. We place the thin sheet at the joints and cover the surface with a layer of wool to eliminate these connection marks. Take out the fine needle and gently poke the thin sheet of wool onto the surface of the head. Gently poke along the outline, being careful not to damage the facial contours that have already been built. When refining, be sure to use the fine needle. It felts slowly, allowing us to make adjustments if any issues arise. If you use a medium needle while refining, it will not only damage the body structure, but due to the fast felting speed, it will also be difficult to modify any issues that arise. After laying down a layer of wool, the connection marks in the middle are still not completely covered. We can lay down another thin layer of wool until the marks are concealed. When laying down wool, be sure to add it in small amounts multiple times to avoid altering the shape by adding too much at once. After laying down the wool again, it should still be lightly poked. You can gently poke the shape of the mouth seam. If there are still uncovered connection marks, you can continue to add wool in small amounts multiple times until the marks are no longer visible. After continuously poking lightly, the surface wool has been felted onto the head surface. Now the head has become a hole, with no visible connection marks. Now the mouth seam isn't particularly obvious. We can gently poke it out a bit more. This is the finished effect. Front view. Side view. Bottom view. Top view. Another side view. Let's take out the blueprint to compare the size. When laying the wool, we didn't add too much, so the size is just right at this point. Next, let's make the dog's body. Before we make the dog's body, let's first observe the blueprint. The front view of the dog on the blueprint is an oval shape. Its side view is a flattened, elongated oval shape. The button limbs are added to the body later on. So now we need to felt a flattened oval shape to create the body. Take out the white wool and roll it to the size of the body. Let's compare. You can take a look at the side view. The side view size is appropriate. Now let's check the front view. From the front, it still looks a little small. Let's roll it a bit more. Now let's compare it again with the front view. A little larger than the picture. The side size is also suitable, so we can take the wool from here. We tear it open from this marked place with our hands. Roll it again to confirm if the wool amount is appropriate. This size is suitable. We set the blueprint aside. This time, we need to roll tightly with force to wrap the wool, making it easier for us to felt. When it's wrapped until a small tail, place the wool ball on the felting mat, roll the tail up, and pinch it tight. Take out our medium needle and first felt the tail part to secure it. Then secure the bottom. Secure the top. Now let's secure the areas on the front that haven't been felted yet. After securing like this, we need to shape the wool into a long oval shape. Now for the protruding corners, we use the medium needle to felt them in. The protruding parts on this side also need to be tucked in. Now this side is a bit long, let's felt it down. This is the side view, and this is the top view. It has now been roughly shaped into what we need. Next, continue felting to tighten the wool ball further. During the felting process, remember to occasionally squeeze the wool ball to avoid it becoming too hard. It's a bit soft to pinch now. Let's continue felting. Let's check the firmness again. It's still a bit soft, so we'll keep going. The wool ball looks tighter now. Let's squeeze it a bit. It should be elastic and have the right firmness. We'll compare its size with the blueprint. The butt part is completed by adding wool. A length and size are now appropriate, so we can proceed to the next step. If your wool ball is a bit large,
You can continue to felt it tighter with the medium needle. If it's too small, you can adjust it by adding more wool until it's the right size.
once the size is appropriate, we switch from the medium needle to the fine needle and gently felt the wool ball tighter. During this process, we should also occasionally check the firmness to avoid making it too hard. After a period of felting, the wool ball has become a very elastic oval shape with the right softness and hardness. Let's compare it with the blueprint. The size is also appropriate. Next, we will lay a thin layer of wool over the entire oval shape to make the surface of the wool ball firmer. Prepare some torn white wool. Take a small amount of wool, gently spread it into a thin layer. Place it on the surface of the oval shape, and use a fine needle to lightly poke it, allowing the thin layer to be felted onto the surface of the ball. When adding wool, be sure to add it in small amounts multiple times to avoid affecting the shape of the ball by adding too much at once, until the entire oval shape is covered with a thin layer of wool. After adding the wool for multiple times, the wool ball is now completely covered with a thin layer of wool. Once this is completed, we can assemble the head and body together. Before assembling, we can also observe the shape of the corgi. The head is tilted upwards. We take out the head and body. First, place the head directly on the body, then adjust its angle. The head is tilted upwards, so we lift the chin up and then turn the head slightly to one side. After adjusting, we can compare it with the blueprint. If the angle looks good, we will use the fine needle to felt the head and body together. When connecting, insert the needle from the bottom edge of the head, deeply felting into the body, and complete the felting around the bottom of the head until the head and body are securely connected. After continuous felting, the head and body are assembled. However, there are obvious connection marks and depressions where the head and body are joined. In reality, the neck of a corgi dog is full and smooth, so now we need to add wool around the neck to make it plump. At the position of this circle, we take a bit of white wool and tear it apart. Take a portion of torn wool and place it at the connection between the head and body, using a fine needle to poke it tightly. When adding wool here, it is necessary to fill the neck area completely. So when adding, the thickness of the wool should be enough to smooth out any indentations. If there are still noticeable indentations after poking, continue to add more wool until the neck area becomes full. After filling it well, you can use scissors to trim the excess fluff around the neck. If you prefer a fluffy feel, you can skip the trimming. Once the neck is filled, the lines become smooth, and next we need to add fullness to the dog's butt. From the top view, the added butt should be slightly wider than the body. Then the entire butt is divided into two halves resembling to small round balls. So when we add it, we need to shape the left and right sides into two small round balls. Then, let's take a look at its side view.
From the side, the butt will be slightly higher than the back.
After adding fullness to the butt, lay a thin layer of medium brown wool on the surface to achieve this finished effect. The limbs will be added later. We should fill the butt to a rounded arc like this. When adding to the butt, you can add wool in small amounts multiple times to avoid making it too large by adding too much at once. We prepare some torn white wool and lay it on one side of the butt, using fine needle to poke it tightly until it becomes full. This is what the two completed buttocks look like. If you like the fluffy feeling, you can also leave the loose fibers and rimmed. In the butt crack area, you can use a fine needle to poke the seam more prominently, which will make the butt appear rounder. After finishing the butt, let's make the corgi's tail. From the back, you can see that the tail has a pointed shape like an inverted triangle. After finishing the tail, it needs to be connected to the butt, so leave some wool fluff at the connection part for easier assembly. We take some white wool and tear it into pieces. Fold the torn wool into a triangle and use a fine needle to poke it tightly. Remember to poke the sides a bit too. After felting, gently pull out some fibers from the area connecting to the butt. This is the felted tail. Now we will attach the tail to the body. Place the tail above the butt and continuously poke the end with fibers using the fine needle until the tail is securely fixed to the body. Now the tail is securely attached to the body. After finishing the tail, let's make the dog's front legs. Before making the front legs, let's observe for a moment. The dog's front legs look like two long, thin cylinders. After connecting the front legs to the body, we can add the shoulders parts. This is what the front legs look like from the front. We take some white wool, refer it to the blueprint, and wrap the wool into a long cylindrical shape, using fine needle to felt it tightly. You can stand the cylinder up and also felt the toe part tightly. Continuously rotate the wool ball to ensure even felting. To highlight the toe area, we can add more wool at the toe position to make it fuller. After continuous felting, the wool ball becomes compact. Now that we have completed one front leg, let's make the toe seams. Take a small strand of brown wool and roll it into a fine line. Place the fine line at the front end of the toes and use a fine needle to poke deeply to form the toe seams. There are a total of 3 toe seams. You can start by poking the middle one first, then the left and right ones. Heighten the 2 ends of the toe seams. Once secured, trim off any excess. If there are any protruding fibers after trimming, you can poke them in with a fine needle to finish the seam. Then complete the remaining 2 toe seams. After completing the 3 toe seams, one front leg is finished. We will use the same method to create another front leg. Now that we have made 2 front legs, let's assemble them onto the body. Place the 2 front legs on either side of the front of the body, and use a fine needle to poke the ends of the front legs to attach them to the body. This is the effect after they are connected. Once the front legs are connected, we need to add wool at the connection points to fill in the muscles smoothly. From the top view, we can see that the shoulder area is protruding. Therefore, at the shoulder position, we can add more wool to make it puff out and appear fuller. The other side is the same. This side is also bulging out. The added shoulders will be slightly wider than the body. We prepare some torn white wool. Lay the wool at the connection between the front leg and the body, and use a fine needle to poke it tightly. Adding wool once may not completely cover the connection marks. You can lay more wool until the connection marks disappear. The dog's instep is a bit flat, so we added some wool at the instep to make it fuller. From the top view, the shoulder positions on both sides are now very full, and the connection marks are completely covered. Now we can continue making the dogs to hind legs, which are also cylindrical. So, using the method for the front legs, we will felt to small cylinders. Referencing the blueprint, take wool of the appropriate size for the hind legs and wrap it into a cylinder. Then felt it tightly. If any stray fibers appear in the wool ball during the felting process, they should be removed promptly. Now the wool ball has been felted tighter. Next, we need to felt the sloped surface of the foot. From the side of the hind leg, you can see the bottom of the foot, which is a sloped surface. By continuously felting the upper half of the cylinder, we can create this sloped surface. After felting, we can already see the slope shape from the side. Let's continue to felt the wool ball tightly. Once it's felted tightly, we have completed a hind leg now. Let's make the paw pad on the bottom. Take a small amount of brown wool, roll it into a small ball, and first create the largest paw pad for the sole. Placing it at the base of the foot and felting it to secure it, forming a rounded inverted triangle. During the felting process, you can occasionally adjust the shape of the paw pad. Now the largest paw pad on the sole is done. We will roll for small wool bows and felt for small paw pads. After felting the 4 small paw pads, it will look like this. Now one hind leg is complete. We will use the same method to continue making the other hind leg. Once both hind legs are done, we can assemble them onto the body. We place the 2 hind legs on either side of the butt and use fine needle to felt and secure them. After connecting the hind legs, we also need to add wool to cover the connection marks. After adding wool to the hind legs, it looks like this. The hind legs and body have already become a whole. The muscle lines from the butt to the feet are very smooth. From the top view, the part from the thigh to the toes is also gradually tightening. However, its bottom is relatively flat. Take some torn white wool and lay it at the connection of the hind leg, using a fine needle to felt it tightly. When laying the wool, remember to add it in small amounts multiple times to avoid making the hind leg part too thick. Now both hind legs have been reinforced with wool. This way, the basic structure of the body is roughly done, and next we will color the dog. Before coloring, let's take a look at the areas where the Corgi dog will be colored. We first observe its body, except for the toes of the front and back legs, and the area between the two buttocks. The rest of the body is medium brown. When laying down medium brown wool, we need to avoid these areas and leave them blank. Next, let's take a look at the head. The white fur around the neck is added after coloring, so we also need to lay some down around the neck when applying medium brown wool. The muzzle area and the forehead here are white. These two parts should be left blank. The areas that are medium brown need to have a thin layer of medium brown wool laid down. The belly of the Corgi is white, so we only need to add some color to the front legs. We take some medium brown wool, tear it into pieces, spread the wool into a thin layer, and lay it on the areas that need coloring. Use a fine needle to gently poke, allowing the medium brown wool to be felted onto the surface of the body. Be careful not to poke too deeply, as this may push the medium brown wool into the body, which will prevent the coloring effect from being achieved. When coloring, apply in small amounts multiple times and refer to the blueprint to check if the coloring position is correct. According to the blueprint, this is the effect after coloring. After coloring, let's create the dog's facial features. Using the AWL we prepared or the existing medium needle, poke a small hole for both of the dog's eyes. Then, use the fine needle to create indentations around the two small holes to facilitate placing the eyes later. Once poked, we can take out the dog's eyes and insert them into the small holes to see the effect. If the heights of the two eyes are different, you can re-poke the small holes to adjust the height of the eyes for a symmetrical effect. After adjusting the eyes for symmetry, first remove the eyes, take a small amount of brown wool, tear it into pieces, and gently felt it into the two eye sockets. Once felted, we will make the small holes for the eyes more pronounced and reinstall the eyes. To secure the eyes better, you can apply a little glue at the back of the eyes. Due to international shipping requirements, you will need to prepare the glue yourself. Now that the eyes are done, we take a small amount of black wool, roll it into a small ball to create the dog's nose. Use a fine needle to felt it at the nose area, shaping the nose into an inverted triangle. This is what the completed nose looks like. After the nose is finished, we can make the dog's mouth. The dog's mouth is felted with fine lines into the completed mouth seam. We will divide it into two parts. One part goes from the tip of the nose to the corner of the mouth. After felting this part, we will lay the fine line in the mouth seam from the fork to the corner of the mouth, which is the second part. These two parts will complete the making of the mouth. We take a small strand of black wool and roll it into a fine line, and use a fine needle to felt the mouth. According to the previous analysis, poke the line in from directly below the nose, first making one side of the mouth, then creating the other side. After the mouth is felted, we will create the dog's eyeliners. The eyeliners are also made with fine black lines. Wrap the black line around the upper half of the eye and use a fine needle to poke it in deeply to secure it. Cut off the excess line and poke the end into the eye socket. Once the end is secured, one eye's eyeliner is complete. Use the same method to finish the eyeliner for the other eye. After completing the eyeliners for both eyes, you can cut off the excess black fluff. Let's take a look at how the eyeliners look when finished. Next, we will make the dog's ears, which are two triangular thin pieces. First, we will create medium brown ears, and then we will make the lighter ear markings. Take some medium brown wool, tear it apart. The amount of wool should be the size of the ears on the blueprint, folding it into a triangle. Use a fine needle to lightly felt it, shaping it into a triangular thin piece, leaving some fluff at the connection point to the head. When felting the thin piece, be sure to felt lightly to avoid pushing the wool through from the bottom. Occasionally flip the wool to allow both sides to be felted simultaneously until the wool becomes firm. During the felting process, if the shape of the wool changes, make timely adjustments to ensure the wool always maintains a triangular shape. After felting tightly, trim off the loose fibers, and one ear is complete. Use the same method to finish the second ear. Once both ears are felted, we take some white wool, tear it into pieces to create the ear markings. Fold the torn white wool into a triangle and place it in the middle of the ear. Use a fine needle to lightly felt it, allowing the white wool to be felted onto the surface of the ear. During the felting process, you can adjust the boundaries of the white ear markings to make them clearer. After the white ear markings are felted, take a small amount of skin-colored wool, tear it into pieces, place it in the lower middle of the white ear markings. Use a fine needle to lightly felt it to create a gradient effect. After the skin-colored wool felting is fixed, one ear marking is completed. We will also make the ear marking for the other ear. Once the ear markings for both ears are done, they can be attached to the head. Take one finished ear, slightly curl the corner of the ear base towards the top of the head, and use a fine needle to felt the base of the ear inward to secure it to the head. The corner of the other ear, on the side towards the top of the head, should also be slightly curled and felted to secure it to the head. Now that both ears are installed, we take out the peach-pink colored wool to felt the tongue. Tear the peach-pink color wool into small pieces and fold it into a tongue shape. Leave some fibers at the connection point with the head, and use a fine needle to lightly stab and compact it. A tongue is a thin slice, so when felting, you should stab lightly and occasionally flip it over to ensure both sides felt evenly. Since the tongue is relatively small, you must slow down the needle insertion speed while stabbing to avoid injuring your fingers. Once the tongue is felted, we can start the installation. Place the end with the fibers in the middle of the mouth, and use a fine needle to deeply stab the base of the tongue into the mouth to secure it in place. Now the tongue is assembled. Next, we will create the mane around the dog's neck. Take a small amount of white wool, fold it in half, and place the folded part at the position on the neck where the mane will be. Using a fine needle, Felt the folded part of the wool to secure it to the neck. Once secured, a small tuft of mane is ready. Using the same method, repeatedly add folded white wool to the neck until the entire neck is adorned with mane. Continue adding mane until the mane around the neck becomes dense. The mane can be added to this extent. Now the mane is a bit long, we need to trim it. When trimming the mane, insert the scissors along the direction of the wool to avoid cutting it to short at once, which would look unappealing and cannot be modified. We should aim to trim in small amounts multiple times. If the wool that has been cut does not fall off naturally, we can gently pull it off with our hands, allowing us to observe the state of the mane at all times. After multiple trims, the mane looks like this now. Gently remove the loose fluff that has fallen onto the body. Now the mane is done. Finally, if you like a fluffy effect, we can use a toothbrush to gently brush the surface of the wool. Be sure not to apply too much effort, as brushing too hard can damage the corgi. If you don't like the fluffy look, you can skip this step. Gently brush all over the body. After brushing, our corgi is ready. Looks super cute. Let's take a moment to admire it from all angles. Congratulations on having your own corgi dog.